You're about to run a vulnerability scan. Are your parameters set right? Will the scan be successful? Stick around to find out.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Thank you for tuning in to another great episode of CySA Plus, and we're talking about vulnerability scanning, parameters, and criteria. Dan, where are we getting started with this?
Yeah, we're going to get started with, I think, some of the risks that are associated with getting into performing something like a vulnerability scan, which seems to me to be a bit ironic, honestly, because we're talking about looking for vulnerabilities and the risks associated with looking for vulnerabilities. That seems strange to me, but nonetheless, that is something we have to prepare for because there are risks for running something like a vulnerability scanner. What are those risks, you may be asking? Wes, I could see it written all over your face. He was standing there just pensive, looking at me going, God.
Wow, you got a mind reader. What are the winning lottery numbers?
Good. I'll keep this after the show. I'll let you know. But those risks would be like the fact that we are going to be actively sending data against mostly if you're doing a production scan against a production server, against a production machine, an entity that it could possibly cause, and this is usually the biggest risk that we're worried about, depending on the scans that you're running, is that it would cause that server to not work. It would crash a service and it would need to be rebooted, that kind of thing. Because as hopefully you know at this point, Wes, you've worked with some of this stuff. I've worked with some of this stuff. Maybe you out there have worked with some of this stuff. When a production server goes down, people get mad. And I can honestly tell you from experience, because I've downed a production server once or twice in my day. I didn't do it more than that because that's a good way to not keep a job. But when that did occur, there were some people that wanted to know why that happened and what are we going to do to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
You know, Dan, I could see if you were a managed service provider and something goes down, first of all, you're not managing the service too well. The service isn't there and you're really not providing anything at that point. So I could see where this could cause a very bad disruption of, your monetary flow in your business.
That's exactly right. And that's what we want to really avoid and look out for. And if we're an in-house team, because a lot of times this is going to come from two different sides of things. Generally, you've got maybe your in-house security specialists and analysts that might be performing vulnerability assessments. And you've got your third party, somebody that I'm hiring, contracting to come in to do this type of work. Either or, they need to be really aware of the fact that this could cause some hiccups. People that are signing off on having this occur, that someone's going to perform a vulnerability assessment and scan, that this is a possibility that it could occur. And we're going to take every step possible to make sure that that is at a minimum, right? Hopefully that minimum is 0. That would be great, but you never know. And it needs to be thought about and risk assessed whether or not we could even withstand that kind of blow. If my servers went down for 15 minutes, is that okay? If my servers went down for an hour, is that okay? What's the probability of that happening? So you got to do your proper risk assessment before you actually engage in scanning. So it's an important part of the scanning puzzle.
You know, Dan, one of the things that I'd like to talk about is a concept that I'm not very familiar with, and that's something known as vulnerability feeds. Now, I'm thinking RSS feed. I want to be maybe a cybersecurity analyst. I want to stay up on the the vulnerabilities that are here today. We have things like CVEs, common vulnerability and exposure ratings and stuff. Are we talking about, when we say vulnerability feeds, are we talking about something like that, like an RSS feed?
Yeah, I can totally see where your mind's going with that. And in a weird way, I could say yes to that question. I could totally go, yeah, but it's not for us typically.
Oh.
It's for the scanner itself, right? That the scanner needs, how does it know that there was a vulnerability? What gives it that idea that I would report back, hey, I found a vulnerability? Well, that comes from its feeds, that it is picking up different known vulnerabilities from certain sources. And you need to make sure that you have that set up regardless of what type of scanner you're using, or not type, but the vendor. That's the word I'm looking for. Regardless of the vendor that you're using, they'll all have a way to update the thing so that you are always working with the latest and greatest information for that activity, right? So that's what we want to make sure that we're doing. How do we do that? Again, this is going to vary across the board. As far as vendor, everybody's going to have their own way of doing it. There's not some sort of standardized thing that says, here is how to do feed updates. Here's how to update the database of the feed, right? I'm using OpenVAS. So if I'm using OpenVAS, let's jump into the computer. Let's take a look at this real quick. I've got the appliance. Let's download the appliance. It's free to use. I know we got the horrible black bars on the sides because it's in a terminal and I can't really change the resolution easily. But you guys get the idea. And if you go into, I want to say it's either in setup or maintenance. There we go. We got feed and we have Greenbone security feed management. Greenbone is the organization. Let me see if I can. Look at me. I outthink the problem. There we go. Come on. There we go. Center that. And I'll hit enter. And I have the green. So how we configure. You want to make sure this is turned on. I know I'm rambling. Synchronization. So that it is trying to synchronize with its feed. If you have API keys or this GSF subscription key, so maybe you have a paid for subscription key for your scanner, you want to add that in here, you'll need that. And then configure how to access the Greenbone server for a feed update. You want to make sure that you do that regardless of what type or vendor scanner you're using. So that's stuff we want to look at. I'm going to go back, I think let's go back again. Under, is it maintenance? Here we go. This is the main crux of the issue. The first option here is feed. Update the Greenbone security feed for your GSM. That is the main thing I would want to do. I would hit enter on that, which would be great. It would reach out and run a background script. Now, if I wasn't running this, and maybe, because you can install OpenVAS on, if you've just got like a Linux instance going on, you wanted to use that instead of downloading their appliance, then you would just write a script that does all that stuff. And you can find that information from Greenbone, or if you're working with Nessus or Qualys or whatever, right? All that information is going to be in your documentation. Just make sure that you are familiar with it so that you can make sure that this activity is happening. Super important, because if you're not working with the latest and greatest, you're not doing your company or the company you've been contracted to the service that they've actually asked you to do. So super important piece of the puzzle right there on getting that done.
You know, Dan, one of the things I realize is that, you know, if you're a help desk, right, and a call comes in and somebody's having an issue with, like, say, they can't reach a server, one of the things that's important to do is to, you know, kind of scope the problem out. Is this affecting just that person? Is it affecting multiple people? I know when we talk about things like DHCP, we talk about scope being a range of IP addresses. How does a scope apply to vulnerability scanning parameters?
Yeah, this is going to be, so this is all under the rubric of we're doing management activities within vulnerability scanning as an activity, right? What are these things to do? Scoping another major player, and hence why we're calling it out, when you're performing this activity, you're engaging this activity. So as Wes was kind of alluding to, what do I want to scan? Maybe I want to scan this and not scan that. And you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just want to scan everything? Well, it might not be something that is pertinent to what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe it's just we don't like touching that because it's a little temperamental, and if you look at it sideways, it goes down. And remember, we were talking about risks earlier, and so maybe you do have those servers that are just mission critical, and the powers that be say, don't touch. If that thing goes down, we are in the woods, deep and lost, right? So please don't. So I'm going to make a scope that says, well, I touch everything but that. So kind of a whitelist or blacklist, however you're looking at it, of what I'm going to scan and what I'm not going to scan. That way, we all know what's supposed to be happening and how it's supposed to be happening. Scope might also include the services that are a part of that specific device itself, right? So maybe I have a list of IPs of devices I want to scan, but I'm only going to scan X or Y or Z services. I'm not going to do a full operating system scan, web application, this, that, and the other. I'm just going to focus in on a certain thing. And these things will be dictated by policies and regulations and things like that. We'll get to talk about that in just a minute, but ultimately that's what we mean when we're saying the scope. What are we scanning? What are we not scanning? And why is that? Kind of give that information out.
All right, so now we've determined what we're going to scan.
Yes.
Right? Now it's important to determine how we're going to scan. And I know one of the things that we have to keep in mind is what kind of information do we expect to get back. So tell me a little bit about scanning types. How are we going to scan, let's say, whatever the endpoint might be?
Yeah, I struggled with how I was going to label this, so I went with scan types, understanding that could be applied to many different things, but they definitely apply to these a few things that I'm going to point out right here. And let's start off with a credentialed versus non-credentialed scan. That is a scan type. Is this a credentialed scan or is it a non-credentialed scan? And what that really means is if, let's say we have a web application and IT Pro TV, that's a prime example, right? We have a web application. You get to log in and see content. Yay, it's a great thing for everybody. But if I was doing a vulnerability assessment against IT Pro TV, if I had been hired to do so, I would say, well, do you want me to just scan IT Pro TV what I can see, or do you want to see what kind of vulnerabilities lie behind the authentication wall? If that is the case, then I will need an authentication mechanism. I will need some sort of credentials. So IT Pro TV would have to set me up with a username and a password, and then I would insert that information into the scanner itself. Let me show you what I mean. Let's log into the Greenbone scanner here. Let me get logged in. If I hopefully I typed that correctly, but it didn't. I knew I did. I felt it in my bones. I got to change that password to make it a little more easy to type. There we go. And over here under configuration, you'll see I've got this thing targets. Let me, bing, right there. Configuration. I've got targets. This would be like where we scope this out. I could actually create a list of IPs, services, whatever I like. Port list. So I mean that would fall under services, I would guess. And of course, this is going to be different between scanners. So don't think this is the way to do it. I'm just using Greenbone because it's free. You can go download that and grab OpenVAS and work with it and follow the bouncing ball with me if you felt like it. So it's a great resource for us to have for you and make you aware of it. That's the word I'm looking for. But here we go. Credentials. I am now able to give it a set of credentials. So I'll click on that. And you'll notice I've already got some creds built in here because I did a scan of a device. That's cool. But if I wanted to add some, I come right over here, top left-hand corner, and you can see that this allows me to input credentials right there. So here, man, that's a big box. Why did it take up so much of the screen? There we go. I can give it a name. So if I was doing IT Pro TV, creds, something descriptive, even put a comment in there if I need more description to it. And then the type of credentials, I've got username and password, username SSH key, a client certificate, maybe SNMP, SMIME cert, PGP encryption key, or just a password. Maybe it's just a password it takes. Doesn't actually need a username. But I can label that, so I'll just go with like username and password, allow insecure use, yes or no, auto generate, yes or no, and then you click save. Click save. It requires oh yeah, that does probably help. We'll do a username of just admin, whatever. Save. So there we go. Now we have IT Pro TV creds. I can feed that to the scanner as we do a credentialed scan. If that's what the client wants, if that's what they think is going to be most beneficial. If they don't, you can say, okay, I don't need creds because I'm just going to jump up to the auth wall and see what vulnerabilities I can find from there. Okay.
You know, Dan, I've got a little bit of a thought process here when it comes to these scanning parameters. Tell me how it would affect, if I'm on the outside of my local area network, maybe versus inside my local area network. Would that kind of adjust what we may or may not see in the vulnerability scan?
It definitely would. Like, it's just from wherever you're scanning from is definitely going to play a part in what you end up seeing in the final report. So it will play a piece of that. One of the things going into that is that might be something that is specified. Kind of what I've been alluding to about the credentials. Why would we need credentials? Well, we need them because I want you to go further into it. Now, that is a very shallow type of internal scan. A true internal versus external scan would be that I actually get to come into your network. I am going to plug in my appliance behind your router, and I will be a part of your network and perform a scan that way. And you need to suss that out during the management portion of this where you're going, well, what do you want from us? Good client, we'd love to give you exactly what you're looking for. And we'll try to guide you that way. But you need to be aware that an internal scan is going to give you more or different results than an external scan would be. Because an external scan is going to show you, if I was a true threat actor coming from the outside, I'm not internal to your company, I'm not an inside threat, this is what you would see. So you start to see the pros and cons, the benefits to each being like, because I used to think, an internal or an external scan, Well, good, or an internal scan, what's the purpose? I mean, you've already got all that trust, because insider threats are a real problem. So you have to, if you want a full picture of what the threat landscape is, the attack surface to your organization is, you want to do both external and internal scanning types. So just be aware of those.
You know, Dan, in this episode, we've already talked about a lot, things like vulnerability feeds, right scoping. What are the scan types? Are there any other things that we have to keep in the back of our mind when we're, kind of assessing what the parameters are and the criteria are for the scanning?
Yeah, definitely. There are some special considerations that we need to take that, if we don't think about them, could definitely make things weird for us, right? We might have some questions that need to be answered if we don't get in front of it at this time where we're letting all the people with buy-in know about what's going on. Types of data. It's an interesting thing. You don't want to, what type of data might be compromised, what type of data might be influenced. Just be aware of that. Technical constraints. We don't have the technology that would allow for X, Y, or Z. Could very well be the case, right? So be aware of any technical constraints. Find out about that stuff as you scope out the actual engagement. Workflow. This is a good one. What is a good time for us to do this? Because a lot of times production hours are not the best time because it would create too much of a strain. Now, it would be a really good stress test. You could sell it that way, and I highly recommend doing stress tests, even though not everybody has the risk appetite for that. It's fine, I get it, but it can be super beneficial for you, so I always recommend it. But you're going to find out when is a good time and when's not a good time. That's what they mean by workflow. And then that bleeds into sensitivity levels. How hard and fast do you want us to go at that? Let's jump back into Greenbone real quick. OpenVAS, should I say, and you have like scan configs right over here. If I click on that, you're going to see the different types of scans that OpenVAS has, like discovery, right? And it's just doing a discovery scan. Got an empty one as a template, full and fast, full, fast, and ultimate, full and very deep, right? Full and very deep ultimates. So you're starting to see more sensitivity, right? Do you just want me to try to figure out some of the low-hanging fruit for you and hand that off to you? Or do you really want me to go at this thing with as much vim and vigor as possible? So that's sensitivity levels. Regulatory requirements is going to be another thing we got to look out for. Maybe your regulations are that you must do it like this, and you can't do it like that. Or this is what we're looking for specifically. And if you're just looking to check off a compliance box, you can run those types of scans. Therefore, it's not as intensive, or maybe it's more intensive. Who knows? But you got to be aware of your regulatory compliance. Network segmentation can also be an issue. I'm running a scan, but I'm not able to actually get to this IP, which is in scope. I don't understand what's going on. Oh, yeah, well, we've got that firewalled off from this portion of the networks. It's network segmentation. Oh, could you, route some traffic for me? That would be great, because otherwise your scans aren't going to run. Same thing with IDS, IPS, firewalls. Not just like, oh, we've got a VLAN, but there's a firewall blocking you from going from this part of the network to that part of the network. So we have to make an exception. IDS and IPS. My IPS is actively stopping your web application scans. Yay, oh, that's a problem. I guess we should probably make an exception for you there. So you need to understand that these things could cause issues with your scanning. Try to get in front of that before you actually engage in the activity. So just a couple of considerations I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of before you get down the road. But Wes, there we go. There's the administrative portion of setting up scanning and doing scanning, what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and things you need to be prepared for.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you remember, you want those scans to be successful. So some of the parameters and criteria that we've talked about, like vulnerability feeds, the scope of the situation, what scanning type, and some of the other things that we need to considerate. That's right. We'll make our own contributions to the Merriam-Webster's English Dictionary. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a lot more to come in this series, so we hope to see you in some of the upcoming episodes of CySA Plus.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.